Hey everybody, it's EJ from Eyedesyn.com, and today I'm going to be showing you how you can create that rubber hose style character inside of Cinema 4D and Cinema 4D Lite, the free version of Cinema 4D that comes included with Adobe Creative Cloud. So everyone should be able to follow along with this one and creating a fun rubber hose style gorilla character. And if you're on the fence about 3D, maybe this tutorial will make you want to explore a little bit more. So let's create our little rubber hose gorilla. Let's learn how. Alright, so here's our gorilla man. We're going to be building a rubber hose style character in Cinema 4D. You can see when I render this, we have some really nice flat shading, some nice flat cell shading, which I'll cover. And we basically built this model or this little character just using some very simple splines, and then I rigged it up with some kind of rubber hose style rigging as well, which I can cover in a follow-up tutorial. But today I'm basically just going to show you how easy it is to create a rubber hose style character inside of Cinema 4D and kind of the benefits of it and adding facial features and all that good stuff. And the main benefit for creating 3D or creating 2D in 3D is that if we want a different angle, we rotate the camera. If we want the gorilla to look around, we select his head and we literally rotate this layer. So we don't have to create some kind of crazy facial rig where there's parallax or anything like that, some very complicated facial rig that I see a lot of people using in After Effects. We literally rotate the head, and I think that's just a way better workflow, and the gorilla, he agrees too. He's like, yeah, why do that? So let's figure out how we can very easily make this little character here. You can see there he is, side view. He's looking good. Looks like he works out. Let's go ahead and just make a new composition. So where we're going to be creating most of our materials is using this primitive menu. And this is basically like the After Effects shape options or shape accoutrement that's available to you inside of After Effects. But these are all the 3D versions of it. So most rubber hose characters are made with like capsule-like objects. Like you can definitely see that this looks like an arm or something like that. And actually that's exactly what this is going to be. So we're going to use this capsule, and you can see that I'm dragging these little handles here, and this is controlling in the object properties the actual radius and the height, but we can actually just adjust those things by pulling these handles. And so we're going to get the big gorilla arms, and we'll just rename this capsule by double clicking on it, and this will just be arm. And what we're going to do is add just a little bit of detail to the arm, and you can notice that I had the little gorilla little thumb and the knuckle there. So I'm going to recreate that by using a couple other capsules. So I'm going to command click and drag, and that'll duplicate that arm, and this will be the thumb. So I'll just go ahead and reposition this, and I want to make sure that I'm just constraining this to this axis, because I don't want to like move this in 3D space. So just clicking this will allow us to just drag it in this YX direction. So we're just constraining it, and there's my 4-up view here that we can click on in and out of by clicking this little top right box window, so we can kind of see how we're working here. But let's actually just go ahead and adjust the orientation. We can do this by switching the orientation here, or just by rotating the object. But I'll just position this, and again there's his little thumb, and let's just make sure we're actually centered up, and you can see that I actually moved that in the Z, so I'll just zero out the Z so it's nice and lined up. And there is his thumb. Now we can add and duplicate this and make this a knuckle. And we'll just go ahead and adjust the orientation here, or we can just simply rotate this. And I'm holding down Shift to constrain the degrees to 10-degree increments. And we'll just move this in place, maybe make it a little thicker there and move this forward. So you can see that, just by using a couple capsules, we have a very rudimentary and simple looking hand with a knuckle and a thumb. Now this obviously looks kind of garbagey because we can actually see the geometry here. But the nice thing about working and building this in 3D is that we can just simply add a flat material to all of these objects here. So I'm just going to apply a material. I double click in the material manager here. And now I can open up my material editor, and you can see that the default material is a color channel with some diffuse, and the diffuse shading gives the illusion of this is being a 3D object. We have the highlight and the shadows. But what we're going to do is actually just get rid of the reflectance, which actually has specular, and the color. And we're going to turn on the luminance. And this is where we're going to be living today, is in the luminance channel. And you're going to notice if I hit render by hitting Command R, this is going to be like a flat color. It's almost like applying a fill effect to all of my geometry. It's just flat white color. So what I can do is go ahead and maybe adjust this to a nice blue color. And then what I can do even further, introduce a little bit more shading into this, or some cell shading, is go ahead and grab a cell shader that is included with Sketch and Tune. And basically this allows us to apply cell shading to our object. And right now the cell shading is using our camera as a light, and it's applying this gradient on our object. But what I'm going to do is just go ahead and just use some grayscale values here in our diffuse gradient. I'm going to go into interactive render region so you can see exactly what is happening here. I'm just going to move the bounding box here, and then I'll just crank up this triangle so it's full quality, and then I'll right click and just go to alpha mode so we can actually see our gray background through there. And you're going to see that we now have just some grays and this white texture, or this white color, being applied to the object. You can see we have a little bit of some shading going on. What I'm going to do is turn off the camera as the light source and actually just have a light, and then I'm going to turn on shadows. And you're going to see that this is actually using the default light in my scene. And you can see where the default light is by going to options and default light. And you can see that as I move this little and click and drag here, you can see I'm actually controlling the default light in the scene. So you can kind of see how that looks. Or we can just create a light altogether, which is what we'll do in a little bit. But just to get this looking somewhat decent, we'll just leave it like that. So right now we just have this grayscale look to our cell shading. But what I'm actually going to do is use this mix mode for the cell shading and actually have this use a blending mode to combine with this color that we originally set. And we only have a few color modes here, and what I'm going to use is use multiply. And just like in Photoshop, we're going to multiply this cell shader on top of this blue material, and you can see, boom, we have this nice blue hue with the darker shade, and that's actually a little bit too dark, I think, just a little bit more subtle looking, and boom, we have some really nice cell shading going on. But what I want to do is actually create two shades and actually have his hand be a different color. So what we're going to do is go ahead and let me rename this blue, and then I'll duplicate this material by just command click and dragging and duplicating, and this will be light blue, not light blur, light blue. And I'll double click on this. And we'll go into our color here and make this just a light blue. And the nice thing about using the cell shader as a multiply blending mode is we can adjust the color in here and change this to any color. And we're going to still have that cell shading on top of it, which is really, really nice. So here's our light blue color, our light blue. And we'll apply this to the thumb and the knuckle. You'll see that our thumb and knuckle are a different color. But what I want to do is actually have the bottom part of this capsule to have white on it. So we can do this very easily by making this arm editable. And what that means is that I have no access to any of the polygons or anything. If I go into my garage shading lines, you can see there are my lines and my polygons. And what I actually want to do is select all of the polygons here and apply a material to those select polygons. So what I'm going to do is just hit C to make that editable. And now I can actually select all of these polygons. And what I'll do is go into my side view or any one of these views here, either the right or the front. I'm going to go to my rectangle selection mode and just select all of these polygons. And you're going to notice that we only selected half. And the reason for that is because by default, only select visible elements or whatever select visible to your camera view is enabled. So you can see that I only selected the polygons in this front or in this right view. But if I check that off and select this, you'll see that, all right, I selected all of those polygons. So what I want to do is store this as a selection, and I can do this by going to select and set selection, and you'll see a little triangle icon pop up, and this will have our stored selection. So what I'm going to do is just rename this to hand so we can actually know what the heck that is later on. And what we're going to do is apply this light blue material on top of the material we have currently. So how layers or how materials are stacked are the rightmost are on top of the leftmost. So this right material is stacked on top of this left material. So you can see that if I render this, that material just overwritten the darker blue material. So what I'm going to do is go ahead and utilize this selection tag we just made, and drag and drop that into the selection field on our light blue texture. And what you're going to notice is that now that applies that material to just those polygons that we selected, which is awesome. So let's go ahead and go out of our line shading so we don't need to see the line shading anymore. And we can go in the interactive render region here and see that that's looking good. So we got one arm. Okay. So let's go ahead and group these objects together. And this will be the left arm. And we'll just leave that there for now. And what I'm going to do is build the body. So what I'm going to do is use another capsule here. And this will just rename this as body. And let's get out of our interactive render region here. Let's move our arm over to the right here. And again, we'll just adjust our object here. I'm a fat gorilla. And I'll rotate around here. And what I'm going to do is actually rotate this forward so we can have him kind of leaning forward here. And that's looking good. And what you're going to know is that he's got a big old butt. And what we need to do is actually use some deformers so he's got a big chest and then smaller waist. So what I'm going to do is jump into our deformers menus here. And we're going to use a few of these as we move along here. But the one we're going to use is this taper. We're going to taper his butt. So we're going to go over here, and to have a deformer act upon an object, we need to make it a child of that object. And I'm going to go onto my taper, set and hit this button, fit to parent. You're going to see that that bounding box now is encapsulating that entire capsule object here. And then I can start messing around with this. And what you're going to notice is that it's actually tapering in the wrong direction. It's tapering his back. So what we need to do is just hit R and then rotate this. Now rotate 90 degrees. And you can see that now we have this nice little taper here. And he's got a smaller bum now, which is good. Doesn't have a big old butt again. And then we can just, adjust like the curvature here. We can have this fillet a little bit, that rhymed. And we're gonna go and adjust like the bounding box size here. So you can see that we have this nice, this nice little tapering here. And if I move this up or down, you can see that we have this like nice arc almost, which is actually, I think I like. So we'll do something like that. Maybe rotate this forward a little bit. And I think I'm digging that so far. So there is like his body and his little butt. So let's go ahead and actually make his head. And what I'll do is, again, use another capsule, and we're just going to be using a bunch of capsules. And really what people need to get past in 3D is that if you want to get into 3D and are used to After Effects, really we're just using shapes and colors in here too, you know, with the cell shading and all this stuff like that. So you know, it's just, if you're a good designer and you know how to manipulate shapes and stuff like that, we just have 3D shapes in Cinema 4D. So it's not that hard to actually get into 3D. It's shapes, forms, color, and just in 3D space. So let's put his head right about there. And we'll rename this head. And again, let's use another taper so we can taper his head. And I'll just, again, make this a child of the head. Hit fit to parent, and this should actually be lined up nice. And I'll just move this up so we have this nice tapered head. Adjust the Y position here. So good, he's got a nice pointy head using that taper, and then we'll give him some ears. So let's go ahead, and for this we'll use a cylinder, and we'll just move this in 3D space here. And again, this is when the 4-up view kind of helps position things where you want it to go. And we'll just rotate this 90 degrees. Just using some simple shapes to create our little guy here. Just position his ear in place. And then we'll round this capsule out here by going to the cylinder. We'll rename this ear. And then we'll check on fillet, and you're going to see that that fillet kind of rounds out the edges there. And we can adjust the radius here to whatever we want. And that's looking good. So now to give him his left ear, and what we'll actually do later on down the line with his arm, and then when we eventually make his leg, is to use a mirror object. And in Cinema 4D, that is called a symmetry object. So to have a symmetry object act along a object, we just drag it underneath, and you'll see that that just duplicated that ear. So awesome. So let's actually go ahead and let's add some materials to his actual face. So I'm going to command click and drag that blue, make this a darker blue, and then we'll apply this to that head, and then we'll create an even darker blue. We'll name this even darker blue and make this the ear color. So I'll drag and drop that onto the ear, and you can see that when I render that, you have some nice color going on. Let's maybe make this a little bit darker so it contrasts a little bit more to the rest of the body. And then we can apply that lighter blue to the body as well. Cool, looking good. And one thing I see right away is I actually want to make this arm bigger. Right now he looks kind of wimpy. He's got a big old body. Actually, I'll actually just shrink his body a little bit, maybe. Do that. This arm up, and I'll hit T to scale, and we'll just scale up his arm. So now he looks big and mighty. All right. So we have his head, we have his ear, and let's actually name this ear symmetry. I'm just going to do that because I don't know how to spell. And there we go. So let's make his leg now. So what I can actually do is just take his arm, command, click, and drag, and we'll just make this his left leg. And we'll just move this and shrink it down. That's a little bit too small, but we'll shrink this guy down, go into our 4-up view, and maybe get rid of his knuckle, and maybe just give him, just have him have that thumb. And what I can do then is kind of position this and make sure that they're both kind of touching the floor, both the leg and the knuckle. And that looks pretty good. Right now I'm just kind of tweaking and just making his arms and everything look a little bit bigger. Looking pretty good. And you always want to make sure that it looks good in all directions. That's kind of a little getcha when you're working in 3D for the first time. You can have one thing looking good in one view, like that looks good, and then you look at it from the side and you're like, oh my god, what happened to his arm? So we'll just undo that. Cool, so that's looking fairly good at this point. So we have his legs, his arms, his head. Let's actually group his head elements together. I'll right click and group objects. This is his head, not his heave, his head. There we go. And what we're going to do is actually make sure that this anchor point is centered to where like his neck would be. So I'm going to go into the enable axis modification mode, and this will allow me to adjust the anchor point or that pivot point of this null. So now if I uncheck that, you can see that now I can rotate his head and it'll all orbit around that new anchor point there. So looking good. I can move his head down a little bit if I want. So you can see we have some really nice cel-shaded monkey here. Right now he's just got one set of arm and leg, but we'll fix that really quick. So just like we used the symmetry object to create his other ear, we'll do the same thing with the leg and the arm. So I'll go ahead and adjust, or just throw the leg into symmetry, and I'll throw the arm in a symmetry as well. So there we go. So what I want to show now very quickly is how to add some nice bending to the arms, and it's very easy. So just like we have taper deformers on our head and our little bum region, we're gonna create a deformer and use a bend deformer to bend these arms to give it a nice little arc. So what I'm gonna do is grab a bend deformer, go into the arm here, and the bend deformer works two ways. So you can actually have it just as a child of the object, and then we can go ahead and again hit fit to parent, and we can rotate or adjust the strength here, and you're going to see that that's bending everything, but it's actually not bending the thumb or the knuckle elements here. It's just affecting this this arm. So what I'm going to do is just crank up the strength. I'm going to keep y-axis length. You can see that's stretching out the arm, and that just keeps it that same y-axis length. And then the other thing I'm going to do is zero this out, and I'm actually bending the wrong direction. I want to actually rotate this 180 degrees, and then you can see, okay, now I'm bending in the correct direction here. But again, you can see that we're not bending the thumb or the knuckle. So what we need to do to have this bend deformer affect all of these objects is place it in the same level of the hierarchy as all the other objects we want to affect. And you'll see now we have our little bend deformer working great. And now if we want, we can actually go ahead, go into our axis modification mode and move this anchor point to like the shoulder, and go ahead and make sure this is all centered up. And then we can go and rotate this out, and then rotate this bend, and you can actually animate characters completely using bend deformers and other deformers as well. One other deformer I like to use is squash and stretch. It adds nice squash and stretchy movement to your objects. So just something to keep in mind, that you can then, add some nice bends to this and animate that way. So let's go ahead and add some facial features here. And actually his legs, let me just go ahead and adjust his legs so his legs are right back where they should be. That looks a little bit better. Okay. You're going to see that one thing I want to cover right away is with the default camera here, and we have no camera in our scene, so let's actually do that. Add our camera, and we'll just look through it by clicking this little viewport icon. And you can see that we have some kind of depth perspective here. And with a lot of 2D artwork, it's very flat, It's very geometric. There's no depth perspective. There's none of that like camera distortion or anything like that. And we can get rid of that in 3D as well by changing the projection of our camera to something flatter or parallel. And you can see that that just flattened out and made our whole composition a little bit more geometric. And you can see the difference between perspective, where we get that really nice depth perspective, that vanishing point action. Parallel just totally gets rid of that altogether. And you can see once that flattens out, you can maybe see that, all right, maybe his head's a little bit too small. Let's scale up that head. And that's looking nice. Cool. So we got our flat, more geometric flat composition. You can see that, you know, if I rendered this out, you'd think that maybe this was made in, you know, Illustrator or something like that. Some nice flat vector art. This is 3D, suckers, look. So what we're going to do now is add a face to our monkey. And what we're going to do, let's actually first save. Save early and save often. Gorilla. Cool. So we got that saved. And what we're going to do is actually build some shapes using some splines that we're going to use as a texture, as a material. So I'll show you that in a little bit. But what we're going to do is just kind of use some splines, just like shape layers, have them fill, and then apply them as a material. So let's go ahead and create like the little facial mask on our gorilla. And let's actually work in maybe this mode here, bring this forward, and then we can actually see visually how this will fit his face. So maybe this is like his eye mask here, and I'll just check on rounding for this rectangle. So this is very similar to like shape layers in After Effects, where we have all the same kind of spline tools. And then what I'm going to do is duplicate this rectangle and make like the mouth portion of this part of the mask, and then round this out a little bit better. And then what I need to do is actually add both of these splines together to create one spline or one shape. And just like you would do a combined path sort of thing in After Effects, we can do something very similar in Cinema, and that is the spline mask. So what I'm going to do is drag both of these two rectangle splines underneath the spline mask, and you're going to see that by default our spline mask is set to union or combine, and it just combined both of those masks together, or both of those splines together. So there's our little facial mask here. We can adjust this still if we'd like, but I think that's looking pretty good. So now we can actually use this like a face mask and apply this as a material. So what we're going to do to allow that to happen is go, and again, we're going to live in the luminance channel, and let's just go ahead and get the eyedropper, and we're just going to sample that lighter blue, and we're going to use this spline as an alpha, so it will actually cut through that shape. So what we're going to do to load up that spline is use a spline shader. And if I just move this up so you guys can see it, there's our spline shader. And you're going to see that what this does, if I right click my preview window and make it flat, so like a plane, you're going to see that we have A and B as an outline. And if I go to my actual spline shader options here, you can see that this is using a text spline, and we can type in anything in here and it will update. And then we can, you know, adjust the offset here and kind of center this up in this little preview window and scale this down. And you can see that, hey, we got some text in there, but we don't actually want to use text. We're going to uncheck that. What we want to do is use a spline, and this face mask, spline mask, and we'll just drag and drop that in there. And you can see we have our mask shape in here. And again, we need to adjust this offset so we kind of make this centered in our little preview window here. And again, maybe up the scale a little bit. And what you're going to notice is that this is just an outline. You can see in our little actual window here, this is just like a stroke path. And what we need to do to actually have this fill is by checking on that fill and just turning down this line width, because we actually don't want any line width at all. So now we have our shape, we have it as the alpha channel cutting through that luminance color, and now all we have to do is go ahead and just apply this face mask material. Let me rename this as a material on the, where's our face, our head, there we go, and we'll just apply this to our head. And again, we need the rightmost material to apply on top of it. And you're going to see that if I go into my interactive render region, our face is on there. We just need to do some manipulation to scale this down a little bit. So what we're going to do with our material selected, we can actually offset, just like we were offsetting in the actual spline shader. We can scale and offset this material. You're going to see that we actually have this tiled, and I'm just going to uncheck that. So now we only have that one mask there, and we can just kind of center this up and make sure that looks good. And I think that's looking pretty good. So there's his face mask. Let's actually add a mouth. So same thing, we're going to use another shape spline here, like the rectangle. I'll just duplicate this. This will be the, actually, you know what? Let's just create, let's delete that. Let's get a circle, and this will be his mouth. And what I'm going to do is go to my front view here, and I'm going to hit C and make this editable. And once I go into point mode, I can actually edit this just like a spline in After Effects. So you can see I have my Bezier handles here, and we can kind of make him, maybe he had a cranky day. He hasn't had a banana in a while, so maybe he's a little bit cranky. So maybe he's a little angry pouty face gorilla. But you can see that just manipulating these points is just very familiar to how you would manipulate points in After Effects or Illustrator. So we're just kind of manipulating this around. So we'll rename this mouth. And what I'll do is duplicate this face mask texture, rename this mouth, and go ahead and change this color to like a dark gray. And then instead of using that face mask for our spline, I'll just use the mouth. And if I click out of this, go to my main perspective view here, and let's go ahead and duplicate this face mask texture, and then I'll just replace this with the mouth, and we should have this somewhat, yeah, there it is. And then all we have to do for this is go into the coordinates, or actually go into the tag here and adjust the position offset of his face. And the great thing about this is that we can go ahead and still adjust this mask or this shape layer here, and maybe that mouth is a little bit too thick. You can see as I'm moving this, it's actually updating in my viewport there. So that's looking pretty good. And the great thing about this is we can change that, and maybe he's happy. Maybe he just found a banana. But for right now, he hasn't, so he's angry. So let's go ahead and let's just add his eyes as well. And what we're going to do for the eyes is very similar to what we used to create the face and the mouth. And that is by drawing another shape object here. So let's go ahead and we'll get our circle again, scale this down, and we'll just move this up. There's a one-eyed gorilla. And let's go ahead and again make this editable, and we'll rename this eyeball. And what I'll do is have him look kind of angry. So I'm just going to hit the shift key and just break that tangent, and hit shift again and break that tangent and just flatten that out. So this is like his unimpressed eye look. So there's his eye, and we'll go ahead and just like we did with the mouth, we'll just duplicate this whole rig, rename this eye, and go into the alpha channel here, go into the spline, and drag and drop that eye in there. And for this, we'll actually have this as the white part there. And let's go and apply this material to the head. And I'll just duplicate that mouth part, replace it with the eye. And then you can see his eyeballs right there. Let's adjust the offset here and move this a little bit over to the left. And I can make this a little bit bigger if I want. And I can do this either by going into the actual eye here, or the actual alpha here, and just scaling this up, scale up his eyeball. And that actually works pretty good. We can also offset here as well. So maybe something like that. And then we can just duplicate that eye and then just move it to the left. And man, he's pissed. He's super cranky. And right now I'm just holding the Option key and just going in increments of 0.1 or 0.1% and just kind of fine tuning the positioning of his eyes. So let's go ahead and give him a nose really quick. And for this, I'm just going to use a simple sphere and just position this on his nose. So like right like that. We don't want a clown nose, so we'll just scale this down and just move this to the right. Duplicate one of these materials and make this dark gray. Gray. And apply that to the nose. Maybe make this a little smaller. There we go. And then again, we'll use a symmetry. Boop. And then we got his nostrils going, looking good. Now let's go ahead and add like his pupils there. So again, I'm going to create another circle. So we're just making a whole bunch of shapes for the different aspects of his actual facial features. So this will actually be like his pupil. So I'll just do pupil and or iris. Would that be iris? I'm not so good with the, no, I'm eye design. I'm not so good with the little parts of the eye. Cool. So let's do that. And then what we'll do again is go into our luminance, and I'll, in the luminance channel here, create yet another effects spline, and we'll load up our iris in here, and again adjust this so the eyeball is kind of centered. And let's actually position this so it actually fits and we see it in our little cutout alpha channel there. We might need to shrink this down a little bit. So right now he's like doing the extreme eye roll kind of thing. And we'll adjust the offset here. Something like that. And again, well, that's a funny looking kind of face there. But what we can do is get rid of the line width, get that fill, and use the fill color. And what I'll do is just load up a color channel in the fill texture, and that'll be white. Or actually, no, this will need to be black. It needs a black iris. And then we can go into the background texture and load up white. So now we have the white background and the black little iris part there. So you can maybe make his eyeball a little bit smaller. So maybe 45 and 45. And adjust all of this stuff around. So yeah, that looks good right there. Where he's just like, this is eye roll worthy. This tutorial is boring for this gorilla. So there we go. We have that. And let's see, what else can we do? We can add like the little line portion that I had right there. This little like eyebrow bit. So what I can do is, just like in Photoshop, I can use layers in a texture field. So what I'll do is just add a layer to this whole spline option here. And then what I can do is bring in a gradient and change this gradient from horizontal to vertical. And what I'm going to do is twirl down this little triangle change the interpolation between these two colors to none. So then I can just move this. And you can see that if I just adjust this, you can see there's that little line there. And then all we need to do is simply go into our layer and use the blending mode of multiply to multiply that on top of the eyeball there. So that's looking really good. He's looking very impressed with that trick. And cool. So the one thing we can do, so we have our nose kind of in 3D space, but maybe we want to add some, like a little bit of his muzzle, part of his mouth, and maybe make that a piece of geometry so it doesn't look so flat from the side view. So what we can do is, again, grab a capsule. So you can see that most of all this stuff is just simple shape splines and capsules to create a hopefully kind of cool character here. So I'm just going to adjust this and move this in position. And what I'll do is apply that light blue, and let's see what this looks like. And with the interactive render region on, it's looking a little bit better. So we have like the nostrils. We can move the nostrils and move this out so it's a little bit more 3D-ified. It's got a little bit more depth, and he's looking really happy. And then all we have to do is drag and drop this in the head here. And then here's our mouth. So I'll just command, click and drag and apply this to the capsule here. And again, I need to make this to the right of the capsule. And then let's put our capsule in the head. Rename this muzzle. Is that just a dog thing? Yeah, I don't know. But you can see that how the mouth is mapped is kind of weird. And what we need to do is change this projection to something different. So right now he looks like he's kind of munching on something on the side of his cheek. He's chewing some gum or something. So what we can do, instead of using the UVW mapping, we can change this to something like flat mapping. And then we can go ahead and see actually where this is, where this material is being mapped to by going into our texture mode. And you can see our little grid here. Now I can move this around, and you can see, oh, there's my mouth. There it is. And what I can do is then, with the texture mode select, and actually scale this up. So I'll hit T and scale, and you're going to see that this is not like constrained. The proportions are not constrained, and that's actually fine. But if we want to scale up proportionally, I just need to enable this axis modification mode, and now we can scale up uniformly and move this around. And we can even rotate this if we want to, turn his frown upside down, something like that. But I'll go ahead and undo that. He's still pouty McPout face. But there we go. So you can see now from the side view, we have a little gorilla guy, and I'll get out of the material mode there and have his little muzzle. And that just adds that nice little bit of depth there, and maybe that's a little bit too far out. So let's move his nostrils up here. Cool. So that just adds just that little bit of depth that when he turns to the side, it gives a little bit more depth to his actual face. So one final thing I want to do is let's just add an actual light. So right now we've been just using the default light, and we'll change that though. So let's go ahead and just add a light. And what I'm going to do is use an infinite light. And the infinite light works by not where it's positioned in our scene. You can see that the lighting hasn't changed, but it changes by the angle that the light is pointing. So wherever this blue line is pointing, that's actually the position of the light. And if I go ahead and turn on shadows, and we're going to use hard shadows because we don't want soft shadows for cartoony stuff. You can see that like the head and the chest and stuff are casting shadows on top of the geometry here, which is looking pretty good. One thing I think is a little bit too much is there's too much of that darker shade in our cell shading materials. So what I'll do is go ahead and select, open this one material up, select all of the materials here by holding down Command and clicking, and then I can actually adjust all of these cell shader materials all at once, and maybe move this a little bit to the left so we're getting less of that dark shade. I think that's looking a little bit better. It's looking a little bit more subtle. I'm going to adjust this light a little bit more if we want. Cool, so you can see just a little bit of subtle shading on our objects. Again, we can adjust this by just adjusting the gradient knots and how that's mapped onto our 3D geometry there. So one other thing I want to show is just a really quick, simple way to be able to control how that eye is looking. So if I go into my eye, go into the luminance here, here is my actual circle spline or my iris. You can see that if I change this offset here, it's actually changing how he's looking. So what if I actually want to create like a null, and wherever I position a null, it'll actually control where he's looking to. So what I'll do is a little bit of Xpresso, and this is just some very light Xpresso at that, because all I'm going to do is do almost like a pick whip expression, where if you know how to pick whip in After Effects, it's just some of the best, easiest expressions you can get into and not actually need to know anything about coding, because I sure as heck don't. But what I'm going to do is just create a null, and we'll name this eye control. And what we'll do is that we'll have the X and the Y of this null control the X and the Y offset on our little eye here. So let's go ahead and go to my eye control. I'm going to select the X here. I'm going to right click, go to expressions and set drivers. So I want this X position to drive the X offset here. So I'll right click on this, say set driven, and I want this to be relative to where it is already. So you can see that now if I move this eye control, you can see that's actually moving where he's looking. And it's got to be fairly gentle on how you position this, because just a few bits left or right will change where he's looking. But what if we want to go up and down? So I'll just adjust the Y. So I'll go set driver Y, and then set driver relative. And now I can move this up or down. This will actually go backwards. So up means his eye will go down. Down means his eye will go up. And you can see that by just dragging this, I'm actually controlling where he's looking at. So if you want to control his eyes, you simply keyframe this one null, which is pretty cool. Again, just don't get too nutty, because you'll lose his eyeballs. Don't want to do that. He does not sound thrilled about losing his eyeballs. Then we can just zero this out to get back to the original position, and boom, we have our gorilla. So the one last thing I want to cover is how to render out characters like this, so we have nice, sharp, crispy edges and not blurred edges to composite inside of After Effects. So I'm going to go into my render settings by just clicking the little render setting button there. We're going to go to the anti-aliasing. We're going to change it to best, and then you'll see that we now have some nice crispy edges here that we can then use to render out of Cinema 4D, and this will look nice and crispy, almost like rasterized shape layers from, say, After Effects or from Illustrator. And you'll see that if I actually change this to like animation, it kind of blurs. It's very subtle, but we get a blurred render. So either use cubic, and you can see that sharpened, or sync is another one I like to use for nice crispy edges. But there you go. Now, if you want to actually learn how I rig these little characters here, you can see here's my little gorilla. He's fully rigged, and you can see he's got his arms and legs all moving here like this. I have a bunch of tutorials, or actually a couple of tutorials on how to get this rubber hose style of character rig animation that you should definitely check out. But if you want to see how I specifically rigged this gorilla character, let me know in the comments section. If there's enough people, I'll go ahead and rig this guy. And just to show you how flexible this whole setup is here's an actual, character. Again, facial features using spline objects and then applying them. And then most of this character is, just other capsules. So here's our little capsule for the arm, capsules for the legs, capsules for the feet, capsules all over the place. So, the workflow that I use for the gorilla character, also easy to use for this flat style of character as well. All right, so you can see that by just using some very simple 3D shapes and using some splines to be able to apply materials onto those shapes, we can very easily create a rubber hose style character inside of 3D and have the flexibility of rotating the face and all that stuff without needing any complicated kind of rigs inside of After Effects. So hopefully this will inspire you to go out and play in 3D a little bit more, get to using those simple shapes and navigating around inside of 3D, because that's really how you start learning, is just how does it fit in your current workflow. So I'd love to see if you guys make anything in this style. Be sure to share it with me on Twitter, on Facebook, on the Instagrams, on the interwebs, all those places. And if you have any questions, be sure to leave them in the comments sections. I'd be happy to answer all of those. And if you want to see the rigging of this gorilla, let me know, and maybe I'll put that out in the future. But thank you guys so much for watching. If you like this, please hit that like button. I'd really appreciate that. And I'll see all of you in the next tutorial. Bye, everybody.